So this is an overgeneralization, an oversimplification, but I want us to understand this graph. Before, people lived in the oral tradition. What this meant is they told stories. When you tell stories, you need at least two people. You need the speaker and you need the listener. You can't do it otherwise, okay? You can't tell a story to yourself. So you need at least two people. But often it was a whole community that participated in the stories. And what this meant is that the stories were living things. They were things that you played with, that were flexible. They were like clay. You can change the stories over and over. Each person who told a story would tell it different. So there are like millions of different versions of these Norse stories that I just told you. Okay? Because each person can interpret that story differently. So these are living memories. And that means that each story is unique. Now there's a concept in cultural theory called the aura, okay? The essence, the soul. And each story has its own soul if you think about it. All right? Let's contrast this with literary culture. In literary culture, reading and writing, you have to do it by yourself. You cannot write with a friend. It would be terrible if you did that. All right? But the benefit is that whatever you write leaves you and becomes part of the page. It's permanent now. And as a result, your words can escape time and space. It becomes timeless. We have Homer because Homer's words were written down, even though Homer was probably illiterate. Okay? Today we live in the visual culture. So think of videos, think of photographs, right? First thing to understand is that it's passive. Both in literary and oral culture, you have to participate. You have to use your imagination to make the thing alive. But with a photograph, it's all provided to you, okay? It's a very passive experience. It's self-enclosed, meaning it's impossible for you to add anything to it, okay? But you get more information that way. So there are benefits to visual culture. So for example, a map, right? If you look at a map, it tells you a lot more information than if someone tried to explain it to you with words. And the last advantage of a visual culture is it is universal. So if an alien species came down to our planet and looked at our pictures, they would know what's going on, okay? Whereas if they heard a story or read a book, they would have absolutely no idea what's going on. All right, so this is the oral tradition in contrast with literary culture and visual culture. The oral tradition is extremely complex. We tend to think that it's just about telling a story, okay? But if you think about it, there are so many variables and nuance and factors in the telling of a story. And that's why each version is unique unto itself. Okay? So I could teach the same material, but if we change the classroom, if we change the students, if we change the lighting, the experience of being in this classroom would change. The Norse, the Vikings, the way they told stories is they would tell it in a big hall. Because remember, it's usually cold up north. It's snowing outside. They would tell it in a big hall. And it's dark. So they have a big fire inside the hall. And the storyteller, the bard, would recite the story or tell the story beside the fire as everyone listens. Some important things to know about this. First is the halls were huge. They were as huge as a Greek amphitheater. So you could seat about 1,000, 2,000 people within the hall. Okay? Second is the idea of darkness. When it's dark and you can't see, your ears become much more perceptive. So the words have become alive. They have more color. They have more detail. They have much more imagery. Okay? And third is these words are bouncing off the walls and they're creating echo and resonance. And so these words almost like bonds that unite everyone in the telling of the story. Okay? And if you think about it, this experience is very similar to the Ice Age. Remember last semester at the very beginning, we did the Ice Age cave paintings. And what we need to understand is people came together in these caves not to paint in the caves, but to tell stories about where they came from, who they are, and where they're going. All right? And all of our ancestors, every one of them, for thousands of years, participated in this process of converging in these ice caves and hearing stories being told to them in these dark, wet caves. So this takes us back to the time of the Ice Age. It's activating a nostalgia within us, and that's why the oral tradition is so powerful. Okay? All right, so these stories have to be told in a certain way to excite the audience. Okay, so think of this class. In this class, we have no tests. I don't even take attendance. So when I present material in this class, it has to be interesting for you, right? Why is it interesting? Because it's shocking. It has emotions. It has structure. When I come to class, I actually do not script out my class. What I do is I think of the narrative structure, the story I want to tell. And then in class, depending on your reactions, depending on the question you ask, I will change some of the details in the story to make it much more interesting for you. In the oral tradition, it's a co-creation, collaborative process. And that's what makes it so powerful. As an experiment, what you can do is this. Think about this. In class, there might be some material you found really interesting, right? So then you go on YouTube. I post these lectures on YouTube to try to remember the experience. And what you'll find is you cannot, okay? Because we've switched from oral culture to visual culture. The same is true if it's your birthday, okay? It's your 18th birthday, and you go out with your friends. And you have a wonderful time. And you're like, I want to take a picture to remember this experience. But what you will find when you do that is the picture doesn't really capture the experience for you. The picture cannot bring back the feeling for you. Okay? And that's why the Vikings were so insistent on maintaining their old tradition and not transitioning into the literary culture. Because their old tradition is what gave the community purpose and meaning. If you gave that up, then your community would lose cohesiveness. Right? Does this make sense to you guys? All right. So what's the old tradition? Again, we've lost it. We've mainly lost it. But remember what it is. Okay? Let's take two things that you know very well and merge them together, and then you can experience what the oral tradition is. It's basically the immersion of a movie. Think of going to a good movie. And remember the power, the immersive power of being that movie. You are in that movie, okay? You combine it with the intimacy of a conversation. So just think of like having this 4 or 5 hour conversation with your best friend and talking about life and love in general, okay? The oral tradition combines these two things, and that's why it's so powerful. And that's why it cannot be remembered. Okay? The Viking oral tradition was extremely powerful, but it was so powerful that it cannot be remembered. It cannot be written down. But as I will show you in future classes, this oral tradition will go on to influence major European civilizations, specifically the Germans and the British, but also the Russians as well. All right. So again, for most of human history, we as humans have shared our time together telling stories. Why did we lose the oral tradition? Okay, remember this. Why did we lose the oral tradition? Well, we transitioned to a literary culture that emphasized reading and writing. So in school, we have you read books, but we don't have you tell stories. We don't tell stories to you. We went from paganism to Christianity, okay? The problem with Christianity is it is extremely sanctimonious. It focuses on what is good and evil. Whereas pagan culture, it's like whether it's interesting or not interesting, whether it's memorable or not memorable. Okay? Live a memorable, interesting, adventurous life. And the Christians are like, no, that's not good, because if you do that, you're going to create a lot of evil. So live a good life. Avoid committing evil. The last thing is we went from an egalitarian world where everyone can contribute to the story to a hierarchical world where the top, the elite, insists on indoctrinating us and controlling how we think. All right? Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? Any questions so far? So this is why we left the oral tradition and adopted literary and visual culture. Okay, so to conclude the class, I know this is a lot to take in, and it's a lot of information, so I apologize, okay, but let me conclude with a story. So I have 2 young boys, and I sleep with them, okay? And what I do is I tell them stories. I don't have them do math, I don't have them read books, but I tell them stories where I make them the characters, the heroes of the story. So I'll tell you one story that I told my youngest son, Mao Mao, okay? The story goes like this. It is Mao Mao's 4th birthday. And I tell Mao Mao, on your 4th birthday, something magical happens. You can pray to God, and whatever you wish for, God will grant you your wish. So Mao Mao is really excited, and he thinks a long time about what he wants. On his 4th birthday, he prays to God and says, I wish for a room full of strawberries every single day. He says that, and God immediately responds. Immediately, in his room, it's full of strawberries. And Mao Mao, he loves strawberries. He eats it right away. The next day, the room is also full of strawberries, and he eats it again. The 3rd day, again. But by the 4th day, he's kind of sick of strawberries. So eventually, strawberries overflow and fill the house. And then they fill the street. At this time, the neighbors are really worried. And we have to explain to our neighbors, oh, it's because Mao Mao wished for strawberries, and that's why we have so many strawberries. But hey, let's share strawberries together. Okay? And the neighbors are at first happy, but then eventually they get sick of strawberries too. And then the strawberries fill the entire street. Then the city of Beijing is filled with these strawberries. Now it's a national emergency. Okay? The military come, scientists come, and everyone's trying to resolve this issue. Then the whole country of China is filled with strawberries. Then the whole continent of Asia is filled with strawberries. Eventually, everyone has to get on a spaceship and get out into space and go to the moon to recolonize the moon. But strawberries keep on overflowing until they reach the moon. At this point, the entire world says to Mao Mao, listen, your 5th birthday is tomorrow. Please pray to God and tell him no more strawberries. Mao Mao, if you do this for us, we will make you president and king of the world. We will give you all the chocolate in the world. We'll give you all the gold in the world. Can you please do this? Can you please tell God no more strawberries? If you do that, we'll give you all the chocolate in the world. And Mao Mao says, yes, I will. And on his 5th birthday, Mao Mao closes his eyes, prays to God and says, dear God, I wish for a room full of chocolate every day. And that's how the story ends. Okay? Now, it's a very strange story. But guess what? My son's going to remember this for a long time. But not only that, it's going to inspire him to think about the story and tell his own stories. Okay? All he has to do is change the story a bit, and now he has his own story. He can change the characters. He can change some of the details. All right? That's the power of the oral tradition. But if I were to write down this story, I couldn't say it in this way. I couldn't do it. Okay? Let's see how I would change the story if I wrote it down. Okay? Same story, but now I write it down rather than say it to Mao Mao himself. For his 4th birthday, Mao Mao prayed to God for a room full of strawberries every day. Immediately, his room filled with strawberries. He ate them happily. The next morning, his room filled with strawberries, he ate them. The very next morning, his room filled with strawberries, he did not eat them, okay? So I have to make the story shorter, more compact, so that's easier to read. The house filled with strawberries, then the street filled with them, then the city, then the country. On his 5th birthday, Mama prayed to God for no more strawberries. His room became clean, and Mama understood the power of words. Do you understand? Why am I doing this? Why has literary culture changed the story? Because now I know that the words leave me and they leave Mama. They go out into the wider world. And therefore, people will judge my words. They will think that I'm a bad father or whatever. I'm conscious of that, okay? So I change in a way that is not so offensive, so that people can better appreciate this. You understand? You see the difference between oral culture and literary culture. In oral culture, you can be intimate. Therefore, you can play. You can experiment. You can be curious. You can be adventurous. And that's what leads to the imagination. But in a literary culture, everyone is watching you. 100 years from now, people are still watching you. Therefore, you have a sense of shame. You're very conscious about your effect on people. All right? So a metaphor we can use is this transition from oral tradition to literary culture is really like the story of Adam and Eve, where because they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge, they developed a sense of shame. They understood that they are naked, and therefore they're being watched. Okay? And because of this, they are thrown out of the Garden of Eden. So I want to leave you with that metaphor. Okay? Oral tradition, we leave it behind and we think that is a good thing. But we tend to forget the power and beauty of the oral tradition. All right, so I leave you with 3 questions, okay? To help us better understand and remember the lecture. The first question is, what is the imagination? What's the memory? Well, in the oral tradition, we would think that the imagination is just an extension of the memory. By making our stories memorable, we excite the imagination. Therefore, we allow for the process of creation. Second question is, could we have Homer, Dante, and Shakespeare without the oral tradition? And the answer, I think, is no, okay? I think we would not have the greatest poetry in human history if it were not for the oral tradition. In fact, if you think about for the past 50 years, what has humanity, even though there's like 8 billion of us, we have more wealth and technology than ever before, what literary masterpiece have we created? I know you guys read the Joy Luck Club in school, and it sucks, okay? I'm telling you right now, it is terrible. It's a piece of crap. And I can't think of a literary masterpiece of the past 50 to 60 years, okay? There are some very entertaining books, all right, but not of the stature and power of Homer, Dante, and Shakespeare. And the last question I have is, does civilization make us less creative? Okay? Does being a civilization make us more ashamed of exploring, of being curious, of playing? Are we less creative because of civilization?